Welcome to Hide and Create, your online writing workshop.
I should have started drinking before I logged on.
Danger, Will Robinson, danger.
You know what? I'm already lost.
That's your thing, Jordan.
Wow.
You say something and you go, right?
Is this being recorded?
Magic mice creatures.
I should have thought of that.
Good! See, I knew I set myself up.
You guys have been passing the joint around while it was going on.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for being ridiculous there. I could put that in the intro.
Welcome to another episode of the Hide and Create podcast. I'm Jaye Wells, and with me today are Jordanellenger, Joshua Essoe, and Moses Siregar, and we are talking about stupid writer tricks. And I'm guessing we each have a lot of tricks in our bags that we bring to the page when we're writing, so who wants to jump in with one of their best tricks? Jordan?
Sure. One of my best tricks is one that my wife absolutely hates, but tolerates because she loves me. When I'm stuck, I have this office at home. When I'm stuck, I'll go out and I'll talk to her and I'll say, "Joe, I can't figure out how to get the gun in the cabinet. I don't know. I've been thinking about this forever." And she'll be like, "Well, have you thought about, using a spatula or something?" She'll maybe come out with like fairly good, ideas, but then I'll be like, "No, that doesn't work. Spatulas don't exist in my universe," or and at the end, I'll be like, "Oh, well, maybe actually we could use a fork, right?" And she'll, and then I'll be all excited about the fork, and I'll go back and write about the fork, and meanwhile she always jokes and says that you take none of my suggestions. You never take any of my suggestions. But just talking about it, because when she says, "Well, use the spatula," then I'll be like, "Well, it kind of works, but because we don't have spatulas, it kind of makes my brain think of alternatives, So that I think is one of my best writer tricks to get out of plot dead ends.
I'm laughing because I relate to that so strongly.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Yeah. How about Moses? Do you have any good tricks?
Well, this is a little different, but the first thing that came to my mind was, actually, Jay, I haven't probably talked to you about this, but I mentioned on the show before that this year I started dictating. So I learned this from Kevin J. Anderson and other people. I walk around and I speak into the digital recorder because it allows me to get my first draft material on the page a lot faster. And I don't sit there and try to edit it as I write it. You can't edit it that much because you're speaking it, so you just go. So like a little update on that, like I have still been doing that this year. It's still allowing me to generate a lot more raw material, which I feel like is really, really good for me because I need to write the raw material faster. But the next stupid writer trick maybe I'm doing with that was, what I found was that I was typing it out myself, and that was taking much too long. I think because I have just some issues with like the elbow tendonitis type stuff, or my wrists feel tight and everything. And so I just noticed like I wasn't typing things out as quickly as I needed to. So it was kind of the whole point, obviously, was dictating, writing faster, getting things done while getting exercise and being in the sun and walking my dog too. But, so anyway, next obstacle, typing this stuff out is really hard for me. And so I'm not saying this trick has worked yet, but, a friend of mine turned me onto a site like odesk.com, where you go on there and you look for freelancers, like people who are transcriptionists. And, turns out there's people in the Philippines who want to type your stuff for like $3 or $4 or $5 an hour. And I'm like, hey, cool, outsourcing. So, I'm totally going to try that because the amount of time it would take me to do that, I'm terrible at like delegating things. Like I always want to do everything myself because I feel like, I can do it the way I want it done. But yeah, this is a case of kind of like needing to hire an employee of sorts to help me with something, which is I need to dictate the fiction and then send it to someone else to type it, and then I just hopefully will find a good person who faithfully can type things out, and of course I'll have to go in and fix all the punctuation and dialogue and stuff like that. I'm sure that'll be its own new journey. But that is my trick to try to be a smart writer, where I can actually write enough books to hopefully make a living at this, and actually be able to, farm out some of the work that needs to be done along the way. So I'll try to say something else about actual writing too, but that was just the first thing that came to mind for me with the stupid writer trick.
Actually, I listened to that episode where you guys talked about that
a
few weeks ago, and I started trying it too. And actually, I was talking to Kevin J. Anderson about that on Twitter, and he gave me some tips or whatever. It's hard to start. You feel very self-conscious, but it's great. Right now, I'm just using it to block out scenes verbally because I like to talk things through. But I think if I keep going, it'll get better. So that's a really good tip.
Yeah,
how about you, Josh?
I feel like. Yeah, I'm sorry. Just one more thing. I just feel like the dialogue is potentially better when you do it that way too, because you're speaking it. So I think the dialogue is less on the nose when you do it that way.
How about you, Joshua?
Well, since you guys are all the pro writers, I am the editor on board, and so I'm going to talk about editing tricks.
Oh, good.
Okay, for me personally, and then I'll move into something a little bit more applicable to other people. But when I get stuck on a manuscript that I'm working on, and I'm really trying to figure out or identify even an issue that I'm sensing in a client's manuscript, I will get up and move around. It's kind of like what Moses says when he's talking into his recorder. I feel that physical motion can really start spurring the mental juices. So if you feel that you're getting writer's block and you're stuck, try getting up, try moving around, try talking to yourself. If you live with anybody, they might think you're a little weird and crazy, but, you won't look any more different than anybody walking around the street with a Bluetooth. So, try that because that'll start spurring things, it'll loosen you up and get things moving again. For me personally, when I'm editing, I have a couple of little tricks that save me time and make things faster. For example, I use a program called Type It In. And there's probably an analog for this for different approaches and different stages in writing and stuff like this. But Type It In is a little program that sits on top of whatever document I'm looking at and has programmable radio buttons. So I have 4 different submenus in this thing, with about 24 buttons a piece or so that if I come across a part where I need to write just a standard critique that will take me a few seconds to type out, I just go over and I hit the radio button and boom, it types it in there for me. Thus, Type It In. So that's one of the ways that I've found that I can save clients money and I can speed up my editing time. So it's a great workaround. If you can find something that will help you, with your outlining or your map building or anything like that, then be proficient. Use these things. Use these programs and apps and stuff that are available.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of apps, I don't know what you guys use, but I started using Scrivener a few years ago to write because I'm not a plotter and I'm kind of a weird pantser because I don't write my books in order.
Wait, could you define what a pantser is? Because I don't think everybody knows what that is.
A pantser is somebody that just dives right in with writing and doesn't necessarily have a plan. They write by the seat of their pants, basically. And so I write my books in scenes, and I write them out of order, and then I kind of puzzle with them to figure out what order they go in and figure out the story. So what I like about Scrivener is it allows you to divide, to organize your book into scene format and then move them around within that really easily. So I do all my drafting in Scrivener, and then I collate that and send it to Word as a big file, and then I do my editing in Word. So I've written probably 5 books using Scrivener now. And if that's the kind of writer you are, it might be helpful. I know people who hate Scrivener just because it doesn't work with their process, but that's a good one. And then one other quick, tiny little hint that I learned a while back for sentences is that, and this makes such a big difference and it's such a small thing, but if you backload your sentences, they call it, which is where you end the sentence on your power word. Sometimes you can't do that, but for example, a sentence that ends with the word bomb will have more impact to the sentence that ends in the word chair. And so if you can structure the sentence so that it ends on the power word, it has a lot more psychological impact. So a lot of times as I'm doing my final editing pass, I just kind of look and see if I can reorganize sentences a little bit, especially in the high tension scenes, so that I can backload as many sentences as I can so that that scene has a lot more like psychological impact.
Yeah, I think that another
that's great.
That's cool. Yeah, another kind of corollary to that is just, you know, the more important things, the meatier parts, the more impactful parts you want generally at either the beginning or the end of a sentence or paragraph, as opposed to the middle. The things in the middle tend to get glossed over more. So the important parts and the punchier parts, I think, I've also heard, and I try to do this at the beginning and at the end.
Mm-hmm. Who else has? Jordan, do you have another one?
Well, sure. I guess this is one that we've talked about before. I was putting together an application for an arts grant the other day, and they needed a 5,000-word writing sample. And, of course, because I'm a die-in writer, I have a ton of deadlines, and I had to do this 5,000-word writing sample in one day. And so noon rolls around, and I'm staring at a blank page, and I go out, and my wife is on maternity leave right now, and I asked her, I was like, I'm just having this terrible time putting together this writing sample. I have to write 5,000 words, and it's noon already, and I've got nothing. And she said, well, what are you stuck on? I said, I'm stuck on the first page. I'm obsessed with first pages. We did an episode about first pages, and I couldn't come up with a way to start this writing sample. And she said, well, start on page 2 then. So I did, and whatever, 8 hours later, I had 5,000 words, right? I was able to go back and write page 1 after I had gotten into the flow and figured out what the writing sample was going to be about. So I think starting on page 2 is a good stupid writer trick, right? You know, it takes the pressure off writing a really great opening, right? You just write assuming your characters have already been introduced, and that stuff, you know, save the hard stuff till last. Another trick I wanted to talk about, actually, while I have the microphone, is as a tie-in writer, I have many contracts usually going at once, right? I have short stories in, right now, just right this minute, I just turned in a novella for Warhammer. I have a 10,000-word short story for War Machine due on the 18th. We're recording these in advance. And I have another 3,000-word short due for Animism on top of editing this show. So there's a lot of deadlines, and when I feel like I'm under a lot of pressure, what I'll do is I'll write the shortest thing first. And the theory of that is that 4 things are easier to manage than 5 things. You know, even if it seems like one of the deadlines is super important, or maybe one of the tie-in universes is more important. They want to give me a novel or whatever, right? They're paying me more money, or for me, just whittling down the stack of things that I have to do, kind of, no matter what I whittle down, if the stack is smaller, I feel like I'm under less pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. The psychological impact of things has such an enormous effect.
Yeah.
What you said, first starting on page 2 so that you can avoid the tension and the pressure of doing a great first page.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the way that I do dialogue. Because right now, though I'm stuck in the middle of my first book, I'm too busy editing to continue doing it, but I can write short stories. So what I'll do is when I get to dialogue, and I always want my dialogue to be really natural, real punchy, and, you know, depending on the circumstance, amusing or touching. So what I'll do is I'll just throw in something that basically has the same tone and idea that I want to have when I'm finished, and then I'll go back to it, because I can't just stop and make, okay, this line has to be perfect, you know, because it'll completely kill my momentum. So I'll just throw in something that as a placeholder, and then when I'm done with the story, one of my editing passes will be just completely on my dialogue. Make the dialogue really polished and sing. So placeholders, great idea for keeping your momentum and being able to keep writing.
Okay, Moses, did you have anything to add?
Now I'm thinking of all kinds of random stuff. Like when I read stuff out loud or when I dictate, a lot of times I slip into this very awkward English accent. And I don't know, maybe it's just maybe it's just for me. Maybe it just makes me feel good, like, 'cause I really want to be British. But Maybe it just makes the whole story sound cool. I don't know. It's just a thing. And other weird things that I do, I'm really glad that I have like my own private office because there's a couple things I do. One is like I'll try to get into the head of a character. And so I'll like start acting the thing out in the room, and I'm really hoping people aren't looking in the windows because I'm really trying to get in the head of like, oh, what does it feel like now that, oh, wow, there's a tiger and it's scary, and then I want to like try to like actually let my body tense up and like try to get in the headset of the mindset of that character, and so then I can describe it because you can't write about something that you're not really getting. So so acting, and then also. Basketball and football. I think I did mention this maybe on another show, but sometimes when I'm stuck or I'm brainstorming, I'll dribble a basketball from my left hand to my right hand, or I'll throw a football from my left hand to my right hand because I think that connects both halves of your brain. And if that doesn't actually have a scientific basis, in fact, then please don't tell me because I want to believe that it does. So I like to do that. And here is a kind of practical neat trick though. There's a book I want to recommend to everyone listening to this. It's called Writing Tools, 50 Essential Strategies for Every Writer by Roy Peter Clark. Just looked it up on Amazon. It has 91 reviews with a 4.8 average. It's a really fantastic, one of the coolest books I have read. In fact, I should reread it. Just with lots of little neat tricks for writing. Kind of like the stuff, like how Jay was talking about with, the power word at the end of the sentence. Things like that. I think actually that's the book where I learned where he was saying the things in the middle of a sentence or a paragraph. People gloss over it more. It doesn't have as much impact. That's why beginning and end is more powerful. But there's a really neat one. I actually wrote a blog post about this. We might be able to put a link in the show notes if we have time. But it was called Secrets of Better Writing, the Powers of 1, 2, 3, and 4 or More, which, again, I just took this from his book. But it's about how when you have something, a 1, for example, that girl is smart. That's a 1. It's a 1 sentence. It's a 1 statement. There's oneness about it, right? There's no alternative there. And that does a certain thing. It allows the reader to only focus on one thing. It's powerful. You just want the reader to believe that. 2 is really interesting because there's contrast. It slows people down a little more, and there's more of a comparison. So a lot of times if I'm going to use like 2 adjectives together, they would often contrast. Or if I'm going to use an adverb, there would be a contrast. For example, she smiled sweetly is pretty vanilla. You wouldn't probably want to write that. But she smiled viciously all of a sudden becomes interesting because there's 2. There's smiling and vicious at the same time, and there's a contrast in that. And a lot of times that's interesting. Similarly, a paragraph with 2 sentences. There's a contrast between those 2 things. There's a conflict, especially if what you're writing about has a certain amount of conflict in it. The number 2 is going to give more of a sense of that because there's opposites. There's 2 things going on. There's more potential for contrast between 2 things. Contrast that with number 3. 3 has this encompassing magical wholeness about it. Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, whatever. There's a lyrical, smooth, elegant quality to 3 of something. So a paragraph with 3 sentences is a trick I'll use sometimes when things are just, you want the reader to just feel like things are right. You just want things to feel good, like things are magical, are natural. I wouldn't want to have like a fight scene with a lot of 3 structure in it, because 3 feels whole to people. It doesn't make as much sense. And then when you do 4 or more, it's a completely different thing. It tends to have a more literary effect. I'm a carnival barker, an auctioneer, a downtown performance artist, a speaker in tongues, a senator drunk on filibuster. Your mind stops counting after a certain point, and you're just like, oh wow, okay, there's this, and there's that, and there's this, and there's that, and you get less critical, and you just let all those words just roll around in your head, and it just kind of relaxes things more. So the summary there is that you use 1 for power, use 2 for contrast and comparison, use 3 for completeness, wholeness, and roundness, and use 4 or more to list, inventory, compile, and expand, or to have a more literary effect. So that's some of the cool stuff that was in that Writing Tools book.
That's interesting.
That's a stupid writer trick.
Also with the number 3, like there's this rule of 3, right? Like if you want to bring attention to something in a story, you'll mention it 3 times. So that's a really good trick. That's interesting. I'll look up that book. I had a point, but of course I've forgotten it because that was so interesting. You were talking about starting on page 2. And I think that's why I write out of order. And it's because it allows me to go to the scene that I'm excited about writing that day. Some days you aren't up for writing a fight scene. Some days you aren't up for writing a really emotional scene. Some days you're better at writing different kinds of things depending on your mood. It also allows me to write the thing that I'm most excited about, the scene I'm most excited about. And so that ends up meaning that those scenes end up having a lot more power in the finished product because I was excited about writing it. And the only times I have ever dealt with any kind of writer's block is when I have forgotten to have fun with the writing. And you always have to remember why you were excited about telling the story. And if you ever lose that, then you're really, I think it can really have an impact on your writing, which is why you need to do things like we've talked about, which is getting up and moving around to go change your scenery. Like I've talked to so many writers who are like, if I get stuck, I go take a shower, or if I get stuck, I go for a drive, or I go do the dishes. Like, it's just, you need to kind of break yourself out of that like hamster wheel thinking that you can get into sometimes.
Hit the reset button by doing something physical.
Exactly. So what else? Anybody else have a good trick?
Well, again, for editing, this seems really obvious, but I've come across a lot of people not doing it, so forgive me if this is something that you do already, but I have been surprised before. So use your find and replace tools in Word. If you've got a global change to make throughout your whole document, then use find and replace. So if you need to change all instances of Kleenex, lowercase, to Kleenex capitalized, you just type it in and hit replace all and it's done. Then your editor doesn't have to do that for you. It not only does it save me grief for when I'm looking at your manuscript, but it also saves you money because I don't have to take the time to do that. Same for if you need to find all the places that you've italicized words and you meant to underline them instead, like according to industry standard. Or you need to search out words that you think that you've used too frequently so you can check each individual placement and you can make a judgment call with your thesaurus handy. You can find present tense mix-ups in your past tense stories. Search for is, search for do, am, have. These can all make a very subtle but dramatic change in your manuscript, and if you're not getting edited, of course, it makes your manuscript a lot better for when you publish it. But if you are getting it edited, it saves you money. Another thing is look at your dialogue. I talked about dialogue a little bit earlier of how I treat it, but for when I'm editing, look at dialogue and check out your tags. Do you use a ton of tags? Do you have tons of unnecessary tags? There's a strong chance that you do because I see it all the time. It's one of the most common things that I work with. For example, if you have a sentence like, I hate unnecessary dialogue tags, he said, pounding his fist against the table, you can easily make it 2 sentences and reduce it to, I hate unnecessary dialogue tags, period. He pounded his fist against the table. This way I'm not saying he said, because it's completely unnecessary. You get by context that I'm the one who said it because I'm pounding my fist on the table right after the dialogue, and it's in the same paragraph. It's totally clear that the one doing the pounding is also speaking. I think the point I'd tell Diana right now is to get her mind out of the gutter with the pounding.
Funny.
Anyway, it's clear. You can make it clear who's speaking through context, dialogue order, other attached actions, and then cut that tag out. And then after you reduce your dialogue tags, look to see where you've placed your tags, because you don't want to follow the same tag pattern throughout the whole manuscript. You don't want to go dialogue then tag, dialogue then tag. Change that. Mix up your order so that your prose don't sound stiff. Sound is really important, even though readers are generally, reading quietly in their heads. There's a melody to words that, just like there's one to music, and you can hit a flat or off-key note by repetitious sentence structure. So fixing those 2 small things throughout a manuscript can really make a difference in the flow and pacing of your story.
Those are good points. Another one I would add, and I got called on this very early on. I had submitted some pages to a critique group through a writers, it's like a professional writers group, so they'd have published authors critique. And she said on the notes, watch your use of the word that. which I had never paid attention to. And I did a search in the document, and I had something like 2,000 that's in a 400-page novel.
Wow.
And so if you don't know why that's bad, it's because the word that is often used in a restrictive clause, and Joshua's probably going to correct me on some of this, but a restrictive clause is used, so if you say, eyes that are blue are pretty, you're restricting it to meaning blue eyes are pretty only. But if you said blue eyes are pretty, it's a more direct way of saying it, and it doesn't bog you down in unnecessary words. And a lot of times you can take that's out. And so do a find and replace on that, and see if you can restructure the sentence, because it's kind of similar in idea to like using passive voice. It just is it's slowing down your prose, and it's like nails on a chalkboard for me now, because I'll have copy editors go back in and add that's where they aren't necessary.
Oh, no.
And you have never seen me stat so quickly. But then also, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, like a lot of times it's unnecessary, but sometimes it does add a little clarity to the sentence. And I do think in those cases, just put it in. Like, it's okay.
Sure.
Like, if it adds clarity, it's good. If it's unnecessary, if it's truly unnecessary, absolutely you want to take it out. But I just want to say, you know, like, it's not one of those hard and fast rules. Like, a lot of people hear these things and they think, oh, I don't need that, you know, and it's like, sometimes it's perfectly good, and and a lot of times it's not.
Well, I think
Just
it's like passive voice. Sometimes you have to use passive voice, but
Right.
for the most part, you would prefer not to use it. So just make sure it actually belongs there if it's going to be
Right.
in there.
It's like Moses says, there's never a never. There's always an exception, especially in anything that's artistic.
Right.
And if you don't mind, can I talk about that versus which for just a second?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Okay, so use that before a restrictive clause, like you were saying, and which before everything else. A restrictive clause is a part of a sentence that you can get rid of because it specifically restricts some part of the sentence. Cats that cry get more attention. That cry restricts that what kind of cat that we're talking about, right? So you can't get rid of it without changing the meaning of the sentence. A non-restrictive clause includes a part that can be left off without changing the meaning, such as cats, which are usually adorable, cry to get attention. Note that a non-restrictive clause, when you're using which, is set off by commas. So with that, you don't use commas. With which, you do use commas. If you're using which, the whole thing can be taken out of the sentence and it still makes complete sense. If you take out that, it doesn't.
So maybe the bottom line is we should all brush up on our grammar. Maybe that's a good stupid writer trick. Because
I was told there would be no grammar.
Like no grammar.
I was told there would be no grammar.
Oh, another thing you should find and replace is pay attention to things that you overuse. And this may come with experience, but like when I'm drafting, I'm lazy. I'm just trying to get it down. So there's a lot of like raised eyebrows, and there's a lot of like smirking, and there's a lot of, like these really like lazy, like body language, tags that I use. So on my edit, I go through and I look for raised eyebrows, and I go to each of those instances. And if I can take it out, I'll take it out. If I can write it in a fresh way, I'll do that. But most of the time, you're just kind of, it's like in my brain, I'm like, okay, I need a body language cue here, raise eyebrows. And then I keep going. So sometimes you need them, sometimes you don't. Not that raising eyebrows is bad. You can use it, just it shouldn't be like on every page where it ends up like on mine. To the point where I had a copy editor to be like, maybe you should not use this phrase anymore, because I was lazy on my edit. But, so find and replace is definitely your friend. All right. So let's get some final thoughts from everybody. How about, Moses? Why don't you start us off?
I'm out of stupid tricks. I'm sorry. I'm going to someone else.
How about Jordan?
Okay, I think maybe the easiest stupid trick is to steal from reality, right? Go to interesting places, right? Get out there, visit old museums that have no lineups and look like they're in some grandmother's house. You know, like just go to these places with interesting objects in them, and then don't word for word drop them into your story, but you know, if you see a really interesting fish on a wall, right, you know, you can drop that in. You know, I mean, if you see this person has 4 fans in their room all pointing at one spot, why are they all pointing at that one spot? You know, drop that stuff into your work, right? You want to write about unique and interesting places, and there are unique and interesting places out there. You don't have to do all the work yourself, right? You don't have to. I mean, it's great to be original and just awesome in that way, but you know, you don't always have to come up with these interesting things yourself. You can steal from reality.
Good one. Okay, Joshua, how about you?
Yeah, there was this house. I was in the sticks in Alaska. We were on our way to a site where we were going to go sea kayaking, and we passed this house that the entire front and sides, I don't know about the back, but the front and sides were covered in road signs. I mean, like the walls, they were just glued or nailed, I don't know, on the entire house, all the way up to the roof. It was amazing. That was a detail that I wrote down. I've always wanted to use it in a story. Okay, so my final thought is, and none of you steal that. Okay, if you want to make a quick way to make a description or a setting really sing, make more use of your senses. You know, use sound, smell, touch, and taste. What I like to suggest to clients is try applying John Barth's method for triangulation. You take the sense for sight for granted, and then you add 2 more senses from among the remaining 4. So when sight alone is used, a piece of writing can seem really flat or one-dimensional. So throw in, like, maybe if you're on the seaside and it's nighttime, not only do you see, you know, the rickety old fishermen's shacks, and you see, you know, the remains of the dead fish caught during the day, and the shells from the seagulls from when they're, you know, catching the crustaceans. You also hear the quiet sound of the buoy ringing, you know, from a quarter mile away. You hear the slight susurration of the waves against the pier. You know, that kind of stuff can really bring your scene to life and make your readers connect emotionally to it. Whereas if you just have one single sense, no matter what it is going to seem kind of flat.
You get extra points for the use of susurration in that sentence. That was very nice.
Thank you.
So my final tip is always be learning new tricks. I think that no matter how many books you've written, no matter how many like craft books you've read, whatever, you always can be improving your craft. And I think that listening to podcasts like this one and reading books and going to workshops and reading very widely, you can always find new tricks for your bag. So thanks for joining us today, and we will see you next week.
This has been another episode of Hide and Create. The show is produced by me, Jordanellenger. The site is edited by Joshua Essoe, and my co-hosts have been Jaye Wells and Moses Siregar. That music that you're listening to was written by Jason Donnelly. We can be reached at writingpodcastonline.com, where you can ask us questions or suggest topics for future shows. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider reviewing us on iTunes, liking our Facebook page, or subscribing to the Hide and Create YouTube channel. That's all for now. Now go hide and create something.